Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. How committed is the government to Wednesday's petrol price increase? What is the state of the economy and how effectively is the government responding to that challenge? Those are the three key issues I shall discuss today with the Chief Economic Advisor, Kaushik Basu. Dr. Basu, let's start with Wednesday's sharp increase in petrol prices. Is a partial rollback likely?
I hope not. I should tell you that the price increase is not a government's price increase, because as of June 2010, petrol is decontrolled, which means the final decision maker on this are the oil marketing companies. It is true, and you will tell, I'm cutting down your question because I'm anticipating it. It is easy to pick up the phone and speak to them, but it is their decision in the end.
Yes and no. You know that when they want to, and if you don't want them to do so, you stop them from doing it, and that happened for a long time. So I come back. You said you hope a rollback won't happen, but does that mean you think it could, despite your best wishes?
Well, I mean, on this I'm speculating as much as you're doing. Things can happen, but I hope it won't happen. And I'll also touch on this, that in the long run, we have to make these kinds of regulations in a way that it is truly in the hands of the companies.
Let me put it like this. You repeatedly said you hope a rollback won't happen. Speaking as Chief Economic Advisor, how damaging would a partial rollback be?
You know, the big concern is if these oil marketing companies come back to us saying that, look, we've made losses and you have to pay us for under recoveries. After all, we are state-owned enterprises. Given that we are targeting a fiscal deficit this year of 5.1%, and this fiscal consolidation step, to my mind, is extremely important, there will be a damage if we make moves where there is a risk that we will breach our fiscal deficit target, which means in the long run, higher prices in general, not for fuel maybe, but in general.
So in fact, what you're saying is if there is a partial rollback, it will have a direct adverse hit on the fiscal deficit. You may gain on one hand in terms of petrol prices, but you lose on the other in terms of the fiscal deficit.
And through that, general prices. So it actually hurts ordinary people's pockets.
So it could be much worse. The actual eventual outcome of a rollback could be much worse.
Could be, could be.
Secondly, speaking as an economist, are there good reasons? Is there a good case for an increase in diesel, LPG and kerosene prices?
See, if you look at it sort of purely professionally, and professionally in this case means people's interests, the answer is yes. In fact, for diesel, all these three items that you're talking about, the under recoveries are now huge, which means basically government is subsidizing to keep the price down. And diesel, the taxation is minimal. So it is just that we are subsidizing given that international prices are very high. And Karan, you cannot beyond a point shelter the population from what is a global phenomenon, which is an increase in oil price. You can lower this, in which case other prices will increase, or raise this, in which case it will hurt you, but it will generally keep the economy calm. So yes, the professional advice on this is you have to go for a rise in the items that you're talking about.
In which case, if there is no rise in diesel, LPG and kerosene, how inadequate and how imperfect would India's response to the oil situation facing the country be?
See, ultimately when, and I've already been in government 2.5 years, ultimately when a decision is taken, you have to look at the professional advice, which I would give clean that this is what we should do. But there are also political compulsions. So the point of time at which you intervene could well have political calculations over there, and it is not as if that we have to do it tomorrow morning.
Quite right. But you're also saying once again by implication that if you fail to increase diesel, LPG and kerosene, then once again there will be an adverse hit on the fiscal deficit, and that critical target of 5.1% could slip, and that would be definitely not in India's interest.
Yes, so it's not as if you have to do it tomorrow morning, but if we don't act on this sooner rather than later, there is a certain window within which we have to act. If we don't,
how much of a window do we have?
You know, I don't know. Say, take a month, take 2 months. We should, within a couple of months, really act on these fronts.
All right, we have a couple of months at most. Yeah. In other words, if politicians don't act, the fiscal deficit will suffer, the economy will suffer, and India's international prospects will suffer.
And politicians will suffer. And to that extent, I'm a bit hopeful that there will be action.
Except that you're saying they'll do it in their own self-interest if for no other reason.
That's right. Self-interest now, fortunately, is coming into alignment with good professional policy.
Well, we hope so, but I'm sure there are many listening to you would have serious doubts about that. Let's now come to the state of the economy. At the moment, we have stubbornly high inflation. We have a uncomfortably large fiscal deficit and current account deficit. We have, in addition, falling growth, a sliding rupee, and wary foreign investors. Would you accept that this is not a pretty picture?
This is not a pretty picture. I accept that. But let me not leave it to just that one sentence. Compared to where we were, indeed, this is a picture which I don't like at all. But Karan, also it is very easy to get this down scenario for the economy out of proportion. Look at one simple indicator, where India stands in the global chart for most of these things. The most important is the growth chart. We were growing 2005 at 9.5%, last year at 8.4%, last year meaning 10-11 at 8.4%, 11-12 we are down to 6.9%.
And it's worse. Let me stop you there. For the last quarter for which you have figures, it's 6.1%.
You are correct.
And in March, industrial output actually shrank by 3.5%.
Right.
So the trend is steadily and sharply downwards.
I agree, but now put it in scale with, it's come down compared to our own past, but do a little bit of a cross-country comparison. I must compel you to do that. And use the Economist magazine's back page forecast for 42 countries for the year 2012. India ranks number 2. So the whole world growth has come down, and we are roughly maintaining the same position in the global chart.
Let me throw other cross-country figures at you. Argentina and Turkey did better than us last year, and they did better not just by a small fraction, but by over 1.5% of GDP growth. Those were countries that were way behind us. And at the end of the day, if you take comfort from the fact that you're doing better than others, but disregard the fact that you're doing much worse than your own benchmark, you're only deluding yourself.
No, I'm not deluding myself. And let me then, since you pick on Argentina, let me take that example specifically. There was a short period during which Argentina, having done very poorly, did overtake us in terms of growth rate. Argentina is sliding off very, very rapidly, and in fact, Argentina is one of the economies in trouble right now.
Who knows how fast we're sliding? I pointed out to you.
Yeah, but we know Argentina is sliding faster than us.
Let's not get sidetracked onto Argentina. Let's stick with ourselves. I want to point out to you that at a time when, as you said, the picture is not rosy, when at a time when growth is sliding in the wrong direction, the only tough decision the government has taken is to increase the petrol price.
No, I'm coming back to
policies. Let me finish my question, then you come back. Beyond that, instead of taking steps to encourage growth, there is policy paralysis. How do you explain the fact that at a critical juncture, there is policy paralysis and your own industrialists at home and international investors abroad are voicing deep concern?
Yeah, Karan, and now you must not cut me off. Let me give you a full answer to this. The cross-country comparison I was doing because you raised country examples, and so I had to do it. You gave the example of Argentina, and I think it was a bad example.
Actually, you made the cross-country examples first. I only butted in to rebut.
You butted in with a wrong country example because we are doing very well. So compared to Argentina. China, growth rate has been dropping, and there is, I'm just completing the global scenario.
But Dr. Basu, we can spend all day completing the global scenario.
But I allowed you to ask your question. Surely you can allow me to answer your question. One more country I'll give, Brazil, and these are all friends of ours. Brazilian growth has tanked. The global situation is very difficult. Until the 17th of June, till we know what happens in the Greek election, it's difficult.
In fact,
I'm coming to India, to the question you asked.
The Greek election could make it much worse. Let's move away from country.
Let me
rephrase it for the audience in case they've got lost in the little contretemps between us. In terms of our own performance, in terms of our own potential, we are not living up to either. And what worries people is that instead of biting the bullet and taking tough decisions, instead of taking steps to encourage growth, there's policy paralysis. And I want to ask you a simple question. You're chief economic advisor. Why is there policy paralysis today?
See, Karan, I'm the last person to ask this question aggressively too, because in fact, I have made the point that there is a decision-making slowdown, which is very, very unfortunate. So on that, I agree with you. But if you're looking at the exchange rate problem and a lot of our current problems, it is a global situation. But, and you can't get away from that, because this figure you have to remember, and I'll make this point, and I'm switching over to our domestic scenario. In the Economist magazine's growth chart of 42 most important countries, India's growth for the coming year, that is the year 2012, is the second highest, China is ahead of us, Thailand and Indonesia behind us. So globally we are fine, but the slowdown in policy. But you asked, you have to allow me to answer.
But let me just point out one thing. Let me just point out one thing.
An interview with only questions. You don't want an interview with questions alone.
I want to point out one thing. You're taking great succor from the fact that The Economist puts you at number 2, but you're overlooking the fact that a subsequent issue of The Economist has raised serious question marks about whether investors continue to be interested in India.
I'm not overlooking that. You're not allowing me to come to that. I am making a cross-country comparison because I don't think we should lose track of that. But you're asking me a question but cutting me off each time. So let me answer. Yes, there is a slowdown in decision-making. And I'm the first person. I've said that before. It troubles me. There are two kinds of slowdown, Karan. I mean, let's analyze this a little bit. I mean, we really want to get out of this morass.
What's the first?
There are two kinds. One is there is a slight slowdown in bureaucratic decision-making. These
slight, are not, that's a euphemism.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't have numbers, so I can't really give you.
And the second?
But let me clarify on this. What happens is, this is a general mood of the country, when you go overcautious when you clear a file. So that is probably to do with that. The second one is reforms. There are a couple of moves that we made, wanting to get a policy in place. We did not manage, we backtracked. So reforms and decision making, these have slowed down.
Can I pause and ask you something there? We've come on to reforms. I want to ask you specifically about reforms. How much of a hit, how much of a blow to India's investment climate and to India's growth prospects came from the fact that we failed to push through banking, pension and insurance bills and reforms, that we were unable to implement FDI in retail, GST and DTC? How much of a hit has that caused?
It has had some effect. So those collectivity of those policies, FDI, I myself was very involved in it. I was really pushing for it. So that setback, other setbacks, and also after in principle decontrolling diesel, that for so long we haven't been able to move, the slew of these have had some impact. But again, the whole world's growth would not have gone down because India's got these policies wrong. So we cannot overlook that this is one of the hardest periods for the whole world after 1933, 1934.
I accept that the world is going through a bad patch. What worries me is that India is not helping itself. India seems to be making it harder for itself.
And more than that, we have to position ourselves. Let me come back to this. We have to position ourselves that when the global center moves to emerging economies, India must be in a position to come out of this crisis surging ahead. And we are not taking enough steps for that, and there I agree with you.
Let me put something else to you. How damaging is it, particularly in international eyes, but also in domestic eyes, when the country's top politicians make public commitments and then fail to live up to them? For example, the Prime Minister in December assured industrialists like Ratan Tata, Mukesh Ambani, Deepak Parekh that FDI in retail would be a reality by June. Clearly, that is not going to happen. Yeah. Last month, when you were with him, speaking in Washington, the finance minister assured American investors that banking, pension and insurance bills would be passed by the budget session. It hasn't happened. When people of that stature make commitments and can't live up to them, how much damage does it do to India?
One correction. In a democratic setting, no individual politician can really make a commitment. You can do that in another political system. You can't do that here. But I agree with you. When you give a broad assurance that we are going to try our best to do X, Y, and Z and fail to do those, that does hurt the mood and the confidence in the country. But if every time a top politician made a statement, that statement carried over to policy, you would worry a little bit about the polity of the country.
Except for the fact that when the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister speak, people tend to believe what they're saying. And then if they can't deliver, people are not just disillusioned with the individual, but they begin to lose faith in the country. Let me quote to you the New York Times, 6th of May. They had a story. The headline was, "Never mind Europe, worry about India." And the story concluded, "We ignore India's troubling trends at our peril." Less than 10 days later, the Financial Times, perhaps the second most important financial paper in the world, quoted a leading Western fund manager who said, "On every indicator we look at, there is a red flag in India." And then he concluded, "The country is coming close to becoming the Greece of Asia." That may be an absurd comparison, But does that sort of commentary worry you?
Karan, you are freely making cross-country comparisons and cutting me down every time I'm doing so.
No, I'm not making cross-country comparisons. I'm quoting comments about India from the Western press.
But you're quoting comments about India and Greece, India about other countries. So allow me.
No, but answer my question. Let's not go off into cross-country. Answer my question.
No,
I'm asking you,
do you have a right to say certain things which I don't have a right in this interview?
But when people hear you as chief economic advisor ignoring
people are also
criticism of India,
people are also hearing you.
Dr. Basu.
But I'm giving in. I'm wanting to analyze some of the criticisms you're making. But you cannot curb my answers.
Dr. Basu,
and
we
then
spent ages going on to cross-country comparison. People will think you don't want to talk about India.
So you did that again.
No, I'm not. I didn't. I was quoting about India.
You're doing it through another newspaper, but you're quoting. Now, let me make a similar comparison. If you pick up newspapers and actually do a clipping comparison of across the countries, given the huge worries that the world today has about the Chinese political situation, the Greek political situation, the Argentinian decisions, actually in a comparison of the kind that you're talking by picking two examples, India will come out absolutely fine.
Something, Dr. Basu? People listening to you will say he is pointedly, deliberately not answering the question.
No, he's
being defensive, and he's being defensive because he knows that the criticism from the New York Times and the Financial Express worries India, it hurts India, it's the truth, and he doesn't want to face up to it.
No, Karan, I think people listening to us will say that he's not being given the time to give an answer because every answer is being cut short, and Karan is just asking very long questions.
Can I quote to you our own industrialist, Azim Premji says, the complete absence of decision-making in the government is worrying. Harsh Mariwala, who used to be president of FICCI, says there is a problem of trust between the government and the corporate sector.
Karan, I can quote myself saying very similar things, but you're not allowing me any full answer to these things. It does worry me that we are not taking decisions enough, we are not pushing through reforms. You're not allowing me to elaborate on any of these answers. We have to navigate the political system and take some very important moves. And again, don't cut me off just now. The global situation is that bad and we are doing badly. But my main point is India can afford to take up a position so that as soon as the global cues go up and the situation improves, we come right up in front. India was in a position to do that and we must reclaim that. So with the people you're quoting, I have a lot of agreement, but we have to think a bit concretely in terms of what we can do.
You say India should take up a position so that when the opportunities come, we can take advantage of them. Let's take a break. I want to come back and suggest to you that far from taking up that position, we're taking up a very contradictory and self-denying one instead. That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with the Chief Economic Advisor, Kaushik Basu. Dr. Basu, you ended part one by saying that India needs to take up a position so that when opportunities come, it can benefit from them. I put it to you, far from taking up that position, we're taking up a very contradictory one. Would you accept as Chief Economic Advisor that the decision to retrospectively amend income tax acts to overturn the Supreme Court judgment in the Vodafone case has sent out a very disturbing, if not worrying, message to foreign investors, and one that puts us on the wrong side of the position you want to be?
Karan, good or bad, the details of this, it's not my field. I can't comment on it because I'm not in a position to. But is this something that is going to make everyone feel that India has become one of those governments that targets wherever there is profit, we are going to go after that? I don't think so. Even speaking to investors who don't like the specific decision, they say that no, there is no sense that we are going into a kind of regime where we are going to target any investor.
Can I ask you to consider the fact that this Vodafone judgment happened after the 122 licenses were cancelled by the Supreme Court, which worried companies like Etisalat and Telenor. It's happened at the same time as GAR has worried a lot of people. It's been raised as a subject of concern by Timothy Geithner, George Osborne, by the US-India Business Council. How much more do you need people to alert you that this is worrying them, it's putting them off India?
No, it is a matter of concern. I'm not denying that. But again, when a Supreme Court gives a judgment, there are times when we praise that India has a Supreme Court on top which has the power to give out judgment.
It's your overturning of it.
But when the Supreme Court gives a judgment, no, there are also Supreme Court judgments which the private sector does not like. You have to take that. But the main thing is this giving a signal of a change in the style of government? I don't think so.
Well, let me put it to you like this. Many people say that this is an example of short-term greed trumping long-term good.
I hope not. I mean, that should never be our creed, that we are going for short-termism of this kind. And that signal we certainly don't want to give to the world. We want to play by the rules and stick with those rules.
On the 10th of May, that's literally just 2 weeks ago, the Financial Times reported that as a result of the proposed taxation amendments and changes that the government of India was considering, there'd been a sharp drop in inflows. Isn't that a sign that people are worried and that they're getting put off?
That analysis is wrong. The inflows, there has been a shortfall. The inflow shortfall is to do with the global situation, because the inflow shortfall has been into Brazil, has been into South Africa, has been of late into Korea as well. But I agree with you that we don't want to at all give the signal that we are going to give into short-termism. But this particular inflow analysis is wrong.
A pleasure talking.
Thank you. Wonderful talking.